sweethearts, you then have to recognise that they actually are used to the sophisticated competition or the camaraderie. So you have a virtual camaraderie, don't you? You don't actually have a hygge camaraderie. I mean, maybe you give them a radio or a television serial to watch, but and maybe you have this insulting thing called the coffee clutch, which was
What's a coffee clutch?
That was when women got together because they were sort of a bit lonely and they needed to discuss their recipes and their children and their
coffee
sewing.
morning, yeah.
Everything that we now actually think, oh, that's really interesting. That was women's culture and how fabulous and extraordinary. But there's all these different strains going on, I think.
Trina, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think when you talk about consumerism, the hygge thing is quite important because that is kind of the opposite. Whereas of course, it's played on for everybody who wants to sell anything. I know that. But if you talk about something being hyggelig, you'd have a good example of saying that, we can't afford to do this and that, but instead we'll go home and have a hyggelig time together. You use it a lot like that. So even, up, through the 60s and 70s. And so it became something that would be, we might not be able to afford this, but that's okay because we are so good at having a hyggelig time instead.
You don't need to spend the money.
Yeah.
Susie, I mean, a home is an emotional space as well as a physical one, isn't it? How central is it to our emotional health?
For some of us, it's absolutely critical. But there are people for whom home is actually quite frightening. And they don't want to be there. And they don't know what to do with themselves when they are there. Or they want to get away from the children. Or historically, men haven't known what their place is. So I don't actually think we can say what is home. We could probably go around this table and say what's home for each of us. But it's sold to us as the place of privacy and of truth, authenticity, as you were saying, and of self-expression. But honestly, it's also a place of drudgery and difficulty, hard work, and for me, enormous pleasures. I work from home, and I also love my home.
Let me bring in Helen Zaltzman here because, I know that you are currently between abodes.
Yes.
Should we say?
Yes.
Helen, how should we phrase it? You had to pack everything up and stay with your brother for a bit.
Yeah, my our landlord wanted to move back into his flat, fine, because it's his flat. And we'd been living there for 10 years, so it felt very much like our home. So at the moment, we're living in my brother's attic, which is very homely, but it's not my home. And nearly all of my stuff is in a storage unit in South London. Is that my home? Probably not. And weirdly, I wasn't very pleased when he announced that he was returning after 10 years of us living there. But now that it's happened, the lack of attachment, I feel I'm actually fine with. In a way, I feel like the home that I now seek isn't necessarily a permanent residence, or at least for the next couple of years. It might be moving around and interacting with various different people, and I get that sense from their proximity rather than the physical space.
So what are the objects that you've kind of carried with you that constitute home? What makes home for you?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have a large collection of square scarves, so I brought a good few dozen of those. But, that's the capsule collection, right? And my husband brought some of his guitars. Again, his capsule collection of guitars is still a lot of guitars by most people's standards of guitars. But I think if there were no instruments at all, then it would feel like we were staying in a Travelodge or something. But I've only got 20 books. And that I know. Ugh.
And what about the stuff that's in storage? Are you missing it? Because this is the thing when you move. I think, and most of us have probably had an experience where we've moved house and maybe you haven't unpacked for a bit or something. But those boxes of stuff that you spend ages packing up and you think it's indispensable, and then you just forget what's in it, don't you?
Yeah. Now I'm thinking, what is the point of all that stuff? Except the other day it was getting cold. Because also the heating doesn't work in the house that now I live in. And I was thinking, my favourite winter mug's in storage. And I don't even know whether I'll see it for a year or where I'll be unpacking it. And that felt a bit weird. And that's just that's a £2 mug. It's not even a good mug. It's just my favourite winter mug.
I think you'll understand that, Trina, because I've read your book and I know that you're quite particular about your mugs.
Yes. That's like, I have a morning one, I have an afternoon, I have one for coffee, one for tea.
Okay, and they've got to be the perfect one for the perfect time.
Yes.
this sense of ritual then about eating and drinking for you? Is that the kind of ritual element of dining important?
Yes, it is. But I'm very fond of my home, but I'm not attached to it like we're talking about.
Okay.
And I think it has to do with my childhood, that I was, I lived in a lot of communes with my very left-wing parents who was trying to do things in a different ways. So I can live anywhere. I can live in a suitcase. I travel a lot. I don't mind it, but I need to have a cup of tea in the morning, even though I'm not British, I'm Danish. So, if I go to a hotel, I will find my favorite cup right away. And I'll ask for it if it's not there the next day, or if I rent. So I have these things where I try to kind of recreate what I think is important.
I suppose it comes back to meaning. I've just moved home, so I've got the boxes. I'm not in a position to unpack them yet because, a couple of thousand of them are books. A couple of thousand of volumes of books, right?
Okay, not a couple of thousand boxes.
No, and kitchen.
Susie, this is out of control. This hoarding's got to stop.
The two things that matter to me, the kitchen and books. Apart from people, which are very important. But what interested me in this transition was that despite the fact that I was moving to somewhere that was very much appealed to me architecturally and design-wise, I really felt so attached to the place that I was living in that I thought I would mourn it. And the minute that I got into this new place, I thought, I don't even want to go back there. I have no feeling for it. It's kind of over for me. And that was a big shock. I don't know if it relates to your story.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
I was really surprised because I thought I am a homebody. I go out in my forest, but I see people at home, and I write from home, so I see patients, and I'm at home a lot. And I thought that it was my physical environment was so important to me. Yet I found myself being able to just kiss it goodbye.
So home is it's spirit as well as a physical
place. It's internalized in some way, I think. Maybe it's because I'm so ancient at this point that whatever home means, it is part of me, and it has come with me to be expressed in a new form. But I had a surprise.
But maybe it's also because we're lucky it wasn't a traumatic removal from home.
Correct.
That we had
we're
dominion.
not exactly so.
So let's talk about the idea of kind of opening up your life at home to the wider world. Trina, you've done that with your book. Did you worry at all about the way it would be received and people perhaps disagreeing or judging, especially if you're saying, this is what hygge means to me, and it's something that's such a big part of Danish culture?
Nope, not at all. Because that's my way of living, and I'm not being judgmental of other people. But of course, I come from a culture where a dining table is really, really important. We don't have homes really without a dining table, and the whole idea of having people over for dinner, both casually and spontaneously, and is such a big part of how we do it. And I think it's a great story. And I really, really, truly believe that in that sense, the Scandinavians have something to offer to the world and say, you don't have to work 50, 60 hours a week. It's pretty important to pick up your children around 4 or 5 o'clock and go home and have dinner with them and speak to them. And I don't really care what you cook. It doesn't have to be, 2 hours organic meal forever and ever. You can also just buy, just cook it and sit down and eat and enjoy yourself or your friends or, and I believe actually, like really naively, that if we did that a lot and sat down, we could change the world.
But do you think it's... I suppose the Scandinavian bit is finishing work early, because what you're describing is incredibly Jewish. It's incredibly Middle Eastern. It's incredibly Indian. I grew up in a household where anybody who walked through the door was fed, whether they actually wanted to be or not, because that's what you did. And I was in shock when I went to other people's houses and was asked to wait in the sitting room while they finished their dinner. I was...
Oh my God.
I just didn't understand it. It wasn't what I came from.
Sure.
So what I think is very different about what you're talking about is that positioned in the Western world, where working from 6 a.m. to God knows what time is now privileged as being the way to be. Your bit of the continent has challenged that.
And I think we can put food back into that discussion and time to hygge. And I think the most important thing that we bring to the table right now is that it's socially acceptable for both men and women to get up at their work around 4 o'clock and say, I have to pick up the kids and go home and cook.
Permission to slow down and permission to opt out of the kind of busy commercial, to work, really.
So that's kind of like the Italian Cheetahs, the slow